The contract was supposed to be simple. 18 months as Julian Castellanos' wife, then we'd both walk away with exactly what we needed. But somewhere between the perfectly staged photographs and the carefully scripted public appearances, something shifted. And when he realized our arrangement was approaching its end, the man who'd built an empire on cold calculation became someone I barely recognized. Someone willing to risk everything to rewrite our ending. Welcome to Floxy's Shifter Romance Tales. Before we dive in, I'd love your support. Can we hit 200 likes on this story? Also, subscribe, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Your engagement means everything to me. I never imagined I'd auction off 18 months of my life to the highest bidder. But there I was, sitting in a minimalist conference room on the 42nd floor of Castellanos Technologies, about to sign away a year and a half to a man I'd never met. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline, rain streaking down the windows like tears. Fitting, considering what I was about to do. My lawyer, Patricia, sat beside me, her expression carefully neutral as she reviewed the contract one final time. Across the table, Julian Castellanos' legal team maintained the same professional detachment. But the man himself hadn't arrived yet. Ms. Chen, Patricia said quietly, you can still walk away. There are other options for your mother's treatment. I shook my head. We'd exhausted every other option. My mother's experimental cancer treatment wasn't covered by insurance, and the clinical trial costs were astronomical. Without it, the doctors gave her 6 months. With it, she had a fighting chance. I'm doing this, I said firmly. The conference room door opened, and Julian Castellanos walked in. I'd seen his photos, of course. Every tech magazine in the country had featured him at some point. At 34, he'd built a social media empire that connected half the planet. His algorithm could predict human behavior with unsettling accuracy. But photos didn't capture the physical presence of the man. He was tall, probably 6'2", with the lean build of someone who ran marathons for stress relief. His black hair was slightly too long, touching his collar, and his eyes behind designer glasses were an unusual shade of gray. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car, but he moved with an impatient energy that suggested he'd rather be in jeans and a hoodie. Ms. Chen. His voice was crisp, efficient. He didn't offer his hand. I apologize for the delay. Shall we proceed? He sat across from me, and I felt the weight of his attention like a spotlight. Those gray eyes assessed me with the same analytical precision he probably used to evaluate code. I assume you've read the contract thoroughly, he said. Every word. Then you understand the terms. 18 months as my wife. Public appearances as needed, approximately 3 to 4 events per month. You'll live in my residence but maintain your own space. No intimate relations required or expected. Complete discretion about the nature of our arrangement. He spoke like he was outlining a business merger, which I supposed he was. In exchange, he continued, you'll receive $2 million. Half upon signing, half when the contract expires. Additionally, all your mother's medical expenses will be covered throughout the treatment period and for 2 years following. $2 million. More money than I'd ever imagined having. Enough to not just save my mother but to give her the life she deserved afterward. Why? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Julian's eyebrow raised slightly. Why what? Why do you need a wife? You're Julian Castellanos. You could have anyone. Something flickered across his face, too quick to read. That's precisely the problem. I could have anyone, which means everyone assumes I want everyone. My board of directors is concerned about my image. Playboy tech genius doesn't inspire investor confidence. They want stability, maturity, someone who looks like they can be trusted with billions in market capital. So I'm a prop. We're both getting something we need, he corrected. I prefer to think of it as a mutually beneficial arrangement. Patricia pushed the contract toward me. If you're certain, Vivian. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled slightly as I signed my name on the dotted line. Vivian Chen. 18 months. Starting March 15, 2024. Julian signed with swift, decisive strokes, then slid a tablet across the table. The first payment has been transferred to your account. You'll also find your new credit cards uploaded to your digital wallet. No spending limit. Buy whatever you need for your role. My role, I repeated, the reality sinking in. We'll begin immediately. I have a shareholder dinner tonight. My team will meet you at your apartment in 3 hours to help you prepare and move your essentials to my residence. We'll handle the rest of your belongings tomorrow. Tonight? My voice came out higher than I intended. I haven't even processed this yet. For the first time, his expression softened slightly. Ms. Chen, Vivian. The sooner we establish our public presence, the better. My board is already circulating the announcement. As far as the world knows, we've been quietly dating for 6 months and decided to marry quickly and privately. You're a data analyst I met at a conference. We bonded over our shared love of patterns and problem solving. I am a data analyst, I said. I know. I researched you thoroughly before agreeing to this arrangement. Your work on predictive modeling is impressive. The story is close enough to the truth to be believable. He stood, buttoning his jacket. I'll see you tonight, Mrs. Castellanos. The name hit me like cold water. Mrs. Castellanos. For 18 months, that's who I'd be. 3 hours later, I stood in my tiny apartment in Capitol Hill, surrounded by a team of 5 people who descended like a well-organized tornado. There was a stylist, a makeup artist, a hair specialist, an image consultant, and someone whose job title was simply coordinator. Arms up, commanded the stylist, a woman named Sage who wore all black and had the kind of confidence that came from dressing billionaires. She pulled dress after dress from garment bags, holding them up against me and dismissing each with a critical eye. Finally, she selected a midnight blue silk gown that probably cost more than my monthly rent. This one. It says I married a tech billionaire, but also I have my own career and don't need his money. Which is ironic, but effective. I bit back a laugh. If only she knew. The hair specialist, Marcus, worked on transforming my usual messy bun into something sleek and sophisticated. The makeup artist, Yuki, enhanced my features with subtle expertise that made me look like myself but better, more polished, more expensive. When they finally let me look in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like someone who belonged on Julian Castellanos' arm. Someone who moved in his world with ease. Perfect, Sage declared. Remember, tonight you're madly in love. You can't take your eyes off him. You touch his arm when you laugh. You lean into him slightly when photographers are nearby. You're the woman who captured the heart of Seattle's most eligible bachelor. No pressure, I muttered. A black car picked me up at 7 sharp. The driver, a silent man named Robert, navigated through evening traffic with practiced ease. We pulled up to a glass and steel tower in downtown Seattle, and my stomach clenched. This was happening. This was real. Julian met me in the lobby, and I saw the slightest widening of his eyes when he saw me. It lasted maybe half a second before his usual controlled expression returned. You look perfect, he said, offering his arm. I took it, feeling the solid warmth of him through his suit. Thank you. You clean up well yourself. Was that a smile? It disappeared too quickly to be sure. A few ground rules, he said as we walked toward the elevator. Don't mention anything about your work that could be proprietary. If anyone asks about our relationship, keep it vague and romantic. You fell for my mind before my money. We're blissfully happy. And most importantly, never break character, even for a second. These people are sharks. They'll smell blood in the water. Romantic. Blissfully happy. Got it. The elevator opened to a private event space on the top floor. Through the glass doors, I could see dozens of people in formal wear, champagne glasses glinting under designer lighting. Julian's hand covered mine on his arm. Vivian. You can do this. Just follow my lead. Then we stepped into the room, and I became Mrs. Castellanos. The next few hours passed in a blur of introductions and forced smiles. Julian kept me close, his hand always at the small of my back or holding mine. To anyone watching, we looked like newlyweds who couldn't bear to be apart. Julian, you dark horse, boomed a man I recognized as Charles Webster, CEO of a major investment firm. Married in secret? We didn't even know you were seeing anyone. Julian's smile was easy, practiced. When you know, you know. I wasn't going to let this one get away. He looked down at me, and the warmth in his eyes was so convincing that for a moment, I almost believed it myself. How did you two meet? Asked a woman with diamonds that could fund a small country. I opened my mouth, but Julian spoke first. At a data science conference in San Francisco. She was presenting on predictive algorithms, and I was immediately intrigued. I asked her to coffee afterward to discuss her research, and 4 hours later, we were still talking. I'd never met anyone who understood patterns the way I do. The way she does. The way he told the story, it sounded romantic instead of transactional. He was good at this. And you, my dear? The diamond woman turned to me. What made you fall for our Julian? I thought about the contract, the money, and my mother's desperate situation. Then I looked at Julian and decided to give them something true, even if the context was a lie. He saw me, I said simply. Not what I could do for him or how I could be useful. He saw who I actually am. That's rare. Something shifted in Julian's expression. His hand tightened almost imperceptibly on my waist. The rest of the evening continued in the same vein. We played our parts perfectly. By the time we left, I was exhausted from the performance. In the car, Julian was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "You're a natural at this. Years of customer service jobs. You learned to smile and nod." It was more than that. He turned to look at me, and in the dim light of the car, his eyes were unreadable. What you said about being seen. That was clever. It was true, I said quietly. Even if the circumstances aren't what they think. He didn't respond, just turned back to the window. We arrived at his residence, a modern architectural masterpiece in Madison Park with views of Lake Washington. The house was all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows, filled with expensive furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Your suite is on the second floor, Julian said, his voice back to business. Complete privacy. Your things should already be unpacked. My room is on the third floor. We have a shared living space and kitchen on the main level. I usually work late, so you're unlikely to see me much. Sounds perfect, I said, though something about the arrangement felt hollow. He showed me to my suite, which was larger than my entire apartment. Everything was cream and gray and minimalist, beautiful but impersonal. Thank you, I said at the door. For tonight. For all of this. Julian nodded. You fulfilled your part of the contract admirably. Good night, Vivian. Good night, Julian. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the weight of what I'd done settle over me. 18 months. I could do 18 months. I just had to remember that none of this was real. The first month passed in a strange routine. I worked my regular data analyst job remotely from Julian's house, attended social events with him twice a week, and tried not to think too hard about the fact that I was living a lie. Julian was exactly what he'd promised to be. Cordial but distant. We shared coffee in the mornings sometimes, made small talk about work and current events, but never anything personal. He treated me like a colleague, which I suppose I was. But I noticed things about him. The way he ran his hand through his hair when he was frustrated with code. How he took his coffee black, no sugar, and went through 6 cups before noon. The fact that he ran every morning at 5:30, rain or shine. That he had a weakness for terrible action movies and watched them late at night when he thought no one was paying attention. I noticed, and I tried not to care. It was easier when we were playing our roles. At a tech conference in April, I stood beside him as he gave a keynote speech about the future of social connectivity. Watching him command that stage, brilliant and passionate about his work, I felt something shift in my chest. This was a mistake. "You're staring," whispered Patricia, who'd accompanied me to the event. "I'm playing the adoring wife," I whispered back. And is that all you're playing?" I didn't answer. That night, there was an after-party at a rooftop bar. Julian introduced me to other tech leaders, keeping his hand on the small of my back, and I leaned into the touch more than the role required. "Your husband is brilliant," gushed a venture capitalist named Monica. "But I'm sure you know that." "Every day," I said, looking up at Julian. He never stopped surprising me. Julian's eyes met mine, and for a moment, the noise of the party faded. There was something in his gaze I hadn't seen before. Something that looked almost vulnerable. Then someone called his name, and the moment broke. Later, as we stood by the railing looking out at the city lights, Julian said, "You don't have to try so hard." "What do you mean?" "The performance. Tonight, at dinner last week, you're very convincing. But you can relax when it's just us." "Is it ever just us?" I asked. "Or are we always performing?" He didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. By month 3, the lines were starting to blur. I found myself looking forward to our morning coffee conversations. To the way his face lit up when he talked about a breakthrough in his code. To the rare moments when he laughed, really laughed, at something I said. We attended a charity gala in June, and Julian bid an obscene amount of money on a painting I'd admired. When I protested, he simply said, "Consider it part of your compensation. You should have things that make you happy here." The painting now hung in my suite, and every time I looked at it, I thought of him. I was in trouble, and I knew it. The problem was, I was starting to see hints that maybe, possibly, Julian was in trouble too. The way his gaze lingered on me when he thought I wasn't looking. How he'd started making excuses to spend more time in the shared living space. The fact that he asked about my day now, really asked, and listened to my answers like they mattered. In July, my mother called with good news. The treatment was working. Her tumors were shrinking. She was going to make it. I cried when I hung up, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude and a guilt I couldn't quite name. Julian found me in the kitchen, tears streaming down my face, and for the first time since I'd met him, he touched me without an audience. His arms came around me, solid and warm, and I let myself lean into his chest. "What happened?" His voice was gentle. "My mom. She's responding to the treatment. She's going to be okay." His arms tightened. "That's good. That's really good, Vivian." We stood like that for a long moment, and I felt his heartbeat against my cheek, steady and sure. When I finally pulled back, his eyes were soft behind his glasses. "Thank you," I whispered. "For making this possible." "You're paying your own way," he said. "You've held up your end of the contract perfectly." "Is that all this is to you? A contract?" The question hung between us, dangerous and inevitable. Julian's hand came up to cup my face, his thumb brushing away a tear. "Vivian." Then his phone rang, shattering the moment. He stepped back, checking the screen. "I have to take this. It's the board." He walked away, and I was left standing alone in the kitchen, my heart racing and my mind spinning with possibilities I had no business considering. We had 11 months left. I just had to survive 11 more months, and then I'd walk away with my money, my mother's health, and my heart hopefully intact. But as I watched Julian pace in his office, running his hand through his hair in that familiar gesture of frustration, I knew with sinking certainty that I was already too far gone. I'd broken the cardinal rule of fake relationships. I'd fallen for my fake husband. And I had no idea if he felt the same way, or if I was just another algorithm he'd solved, another problem he'd efficiently managed. The contract said 18 months. But my heart wasn't consulting the timeline. Month 6 changed everything. We were in New York for a series of investor meetings. Julian had been tense all week, the pressure of an upcoming product launch making him even more distant than usual. I'd barely seen him except for the required public appearances. On Thursday night, we attended a tech industry mixer at an exclusive club in Manhattan. I wore red, which Sage said conveyed confidence and passion. I felt like I was wearing armor. Julian looked exhausted, his usual controlled expression cracking around the edges. But he played his part, introducing me to investors and journalists, keeping his hand on my waist like he'd done 100 times before. Julian. A woman's voice cut through the crowd, sharp and carrying. I heard rumors, but I didn't believe them. I turned to see a stunning woman approaching, all long legs and perfect features. She wore black like a weapon and looked at Julian like she owned him. Julian's hand tightened on my waist. Natasha. Married? Natasha laughed, but there was no humor in it. You actually got married? To her? The disdain in her voice when she looked at me was palpable. Natasha Chen, this is my wife, Vivian. Julian's voice was cold. Vivian, Natasha is my former business partner. We dissolved our partnership 2 years ago. Business partner, Natasha repeated, moving closer. Is that what we're calling it now? Tell me, Mrs. Castellanos, did Julian mention that we were engaged once? Or that I know exactly what kind of man you married? My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression neutral. Julian and I don't dwell on the past. We're focused on our future together. How sweet. Natasha's smile was vicious. I give it 6 months before he gets bored and moves on. He always does. That's enough. Julian's voice was deadly quiet. Whatever issues you have with me, Natasha, you don't take them out on my wife. Your wife, Natasha laughed again. Tell me, Julian, does she know about the algorithm? Does she know you're probably the reason her phone knows her better than she knows herself? Does she know what you're really capable of? We're leaving. Julian took my hand, already moving toward the exit. But Natasha wasn't done. Does she know you don't believe in love, Julian? That you think it's just neurochemistry and pattern recognition? That you built your entire empire on the premise that human connection is just data to be analyzed and exploited? We kept walking, but her words followed us like knives. In the car, the silence was suffocating. Julian stared out the window, his jaw clenched, one hand fisted on his thigh. Were you engaged to her? I finally asked. Briefly. 3 years ago. It didn't work out. Because you don't believe in love? He turned to look at me then, his eyes storm-gray and intense. I believe in compatibility. In shared goals and mutual respect. In partnerships that make logical sense. Natasha wanted something I couldn't give her. What was that? Emotional availability. Vulnerability. All the things that make someone weak in my world. That's sad, I said quietly. It's practical. Those aren't mutually exclusive. We arrived at our hotel, a luxury high-rise in Midtown. We'd been given a suite with separate bedrooms, maintaining the appearance of marriage while respecting our actual arrangement. But tonight, neither of us moved toward our separate rooms. We stood in the living area, the city lights glittering through the windows, and something felt different. Charged. She was wrong, you know, Julian said suddenly. About getting bored. I don't get bored. What do you get? He moved closer, and I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the cracks in his careful control. Confused. Distracted. Concerned that I made. He was close now, so close I could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. Julian, what are you saying? I'm saying the contract was a mistake. I'm saying I don't want this to be fake anymore. I'm saying. He stopped, running his hand through his hair in frustration. I'm saying I'm falling for you, and I don't know what to do about it. The words hung in the air between us, impossible and perfect and terrifying. I thought it was just me, I whispered. His eyes snapped to mine. What? I thought I was the only one feeling this. I've been falling for you for months, Julian. Every morning when you remember how I take my coffee. Every time you get excited about your code and forget to be controlled. Every moment you let me see the real you behind the algorithm. He cupped my face with both hands, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. We can't do this. Why not? Because it changes everything. Because there's a contract with an end date. Because I don't know how to do this, how to be what you need. I don't need you to be anything other than who you are, I said, covering his hands with mine. I just need you to be honest about what you want. I want you, he said, his voice rough. I want this to be real. I want to wake up next to you, and not because it's in a contract but because neither of us can imagine sleeping anywhere else. I want to rewrite every line of our arrangement because the original terms are completely insufficient. Then kiss me, I breathed. Not for cameras or investors or appearances. Kiss me like you mean it. He did. Julian's mouth met mine with an urgency that stole my breath, his hand sliding into my hair as he pulled me closer. This wasn't the chaste kisses we'd shared for photos. This was hunger and need and months of denial pouring out all at once. I kissed him back with everything I'd been holding in, my hands fisting in his shirt, and he made a sound low in his throat that sent heat coursing through me. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against mine. This complicates things, he murmured. Everything worth having is complicated. The contract. We'll figure it out. Together. He pulled back to look at me, his eyes searching mine. I'm not good at this, Vivian. Relationships, emotions, all of it. I'll probably analyze everything to death and forget to actually feel it half the time. And I'm stubborn and I overthink and I have a terrible habit of using humor to deflect when things get too real. We're both disasters. That's fine. This changes the terms of our arrangement. Good. The terms were always incomplete anyway. He smiled then, really smiled, and it transformed his entire face. You're right. They didn't account for this variable. What variable? That you're extraordinary. That I'd be an idiot to let you walk away in 12 months. That I want to keep you. Then keep me, I said simply. We kissed again, slower this time, savoring instead of desperate. And when he picked me up and carried me to his bedroom, when we spent the night learning each other without contracts or clauses or carefully maintained distance, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Like maybe, just maybe, we'd found something the algorithm could never have predicted. The next 6 months were different. We stopped pretending, at least with each other. In public, nothing changed. We were still the perfect couple, Julian Castellanos and his brilliant wife. But in private, behind closed doors, we became something real. Julian was right. He wasn't naturally good at relationships. He forgot anniversaries and struggled with expressing emotions and sometimes retreated into work when things felt too intense. But he tried. He brought me coffee every morning and learned to read my moods and held me when my mother had setbacks in her treatment. And I learned him. His fears about being seen as just his money or his algorithm. His genuine passion for connecting people through technology. The way he went silent when he was overwhelmed and needed space, not distance. We fought sometimes. Real fights where I called him on his emotional unavailability and he called me on my tendency to avoid difficult conversations. But we always came back together, always worked through it. Because somewhere along the way, this had stopped being about a contract and started being about us. My mother met him in month 10. She was doing well, her cancer in remission, and she insisted on flying to Seattle to see the man I'd married. He's very serious, she observed after dinner, watching Julian wash dishes with systematic precision. He grows on you, I said. She smiled knowingly. You love him. Yes. I really do. Does he love you? I thought about the way Julian looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The way he'd rearranged his entire schedule to come to my mother's appointments. The way he held my hand while we watched terrible movies and whispered running commentary that made me laugh. Yes, I said with certainty. He does. Julian chose that moment to walk back in, and my mother studied him with the shrewd eyes of a woman who'd raised a daughter alone and learned to read people for survival. Julian, she said. Thank you for taking such good care of my daughter. Something shifted in his expression, vulnerability flickering across his face. She takes care of me too, Mrs. Chen. More than she knows. It was the most openly emotional I'd ever heard him, and I felt my throat tighten. Month 12 arrived too quickly. The contract had 6 months left, but it felt like a countdown to something we no longer wanted. We didn't talk about it. Instead, we just lived. We traveled together, Julian showing me cities through his eyes. We worked side by side, his coding and my data analysis complementing each other perfectly. We built something that looked a lot like a life. But the unspoken question remained, what happens when the contract ends? It came to a head in month 14, 4 months before our arrangement was set to expire. Julian had been quiet all week, distracted and distant in a way he hadn't been since those early months. I'd tried to give him space, but finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Talk to me, I said one night, finding him on the deck overlooking the lake. What's going on in that brilliant head of yours? He didn't turn around. I've been thinking about the contract. My stomach dropped. Oh. 4 months, he continued. In 4 months, according to our agreement, you're free to leave. You'll receive your final payment, and we'll amicably part ways. Julian. That was the deal. That's what we both signed. That was before, I said, moving to stand beside him. Before everything changed. Did it change? Or did we just get caught up in playing house? His words felt like a slap. You don't mean that. Finally, he looked at me, and his eyes were tortured. I don't know what I mean. I don't know how to separate what's real from what we constructed. You were hired to be my wife, Vivian. How do I know this isn't just you fulfilling the contract exceptionally well? Are you serious right now? Anger sparked in my chest. You think I've been faking this for 14 months? You think I'm that good an actress? I think you're brilliant and adaptable and you needed the money badly enough to sign the contract in the first place. Maybe you've just convinced yourself that this is real because it's easier than admitting you sold 18 months for $2 million. The words hit like physical blows. That's not fair. Isn't it? Can you honestly tell me that if I'd been a janitor instead of a billionaire, you would have felt the same way? That the money had nothing to do with any of this? Of course the money mattered. I shouted, my composure finally breaking. My mother was dying, Julian. I was desperate. But that doesn't mean what I feel for you isn't real. How do you know? How do either of us know? I stared at him, this man I'd fallen in love with, who was now pushing me away with both hands. Why are you doing this? Because in 4 months, you're free. His voice cracked. You can leave with your money and your mother's health and never look back. And maybe that's what you should do because I don't know if I can trust that you'd stay otherwise. Understanding dawned, cold and clear. You're scared. I'm practical. You're terrified, I continued. Because for the first time in your life, you can't predict the outcome. You can't run the algorithm and know for certain how this ends. So you're sabotaging it before I can hurt you first. Vivian. No. I stepped back, tears burning in my eyes. You want to know if this is real? Fine. I'll make it easy for you. I pulled off the wedding ring he'd given me, the one I'd worn for 14 months, and held it out to him. Here. Contract fulfilled. I'm leaving. What are you doing? Proving it's real. Because if I only cared about the money, I'd stay for 4 more months and collect the full payment. But I'm not going to stay somewhere I'm not trusted. I'm not going to keep fighting for something when you've already decided it's not worth believing in. Vivian, wait. He reached for me, but I pulled away. I love you, Julian Castellanos. Not your money, not your house, not the lifestyle. You. The man who runs at 5:30 in the morning and drinks too much coffee and watches terrible movies and tries so hard to be emotionless but feels everything deeply. I love you so much it terrifies me. But I won't beg you to believe it. I walked away, leaving him standing on the deck with my ring in his hand. I packed quickly, grabbed my car keys, and drove to Patricia's house. She took one look at my face and pulled me inside without questions. What happened? She asked once I'd stopped crying enough to speak. I told her everything. The whole story, from the contract to falling in love to Julian's accusations tonight. Men are idiots, Patricia declared when I finished. Especially brilliant ones. They think they can analyze their way out of feeling vulnerable. I left, I said, the reality of it hitting me. I actually left. Good. If he's too scared to fight for what you have, then he doesn't deserve you. But lying in Patricia's guest room that night, I couldn't shake the hollow feeling in my chest. I'd walked away to prove a point, but what if Julian never came after me? What if he just let me go? 3 days passed with no word from Julian. No calls, no texts, nothing. I moved back into my old apartment, which felt impossibly small after Julian's house. My mother called every day, concerned but supportive. My friends didn't know what to think. As far as they knew, I'd just left my tech billionaire husband out of nowhere. On the 4th day, I received a message from Julian's lawyer requesting a meeting. Here it was. The end. He was probably going to enforce the contract terms, demand I return the first $1 million, and make this as legally clean as possible. I arrived at the lawyer's office with Patricia at my side, ready for whatever came next. But instead of Julian's legal team, I found Julian himself waiting in the conference room. He looked terrible. His hair was a mess, his clothes rumpled, and there were dark circles under his eyes behind his glasses. He stood when I entered, and I saw him grip the back of the chair like he needed the support. Vivian. My name came out rough. Thank you for coming. Your lawyer said you wanted a meeting. I lied. I wanted to see you, and I didn't think you'd agree otherwise. He pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. I had my legal team draw these up. My heart sank. Here it came. The dissolution of our contract, the legal end of everything. I opened the folder with shaking hands. But instead of termination papers, I found something else entirely. It was our original contract, torn into pieces and mounted on a page with a single word written across it in Julian's precise handwriting, void. Beneath it was a new document. Not a contract. A letter. Vivian. I've spent my entire adult life believing that everything could be quantified, predicted, and controlled through data and algorithms. I built an empire on the premise that human behavior follows patterns, that connection is just neurochemistry, that love is merely a series of predictable responses. Then you walked into my conference room, and every algorithm I've ever created became completely useless. You're right. I was scared. Terrified, actually. Because with you, I can't predict outcomes. I can't run simulations or test variables. I can only feel, and feeling is the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. I've spent the last 4 days running every analysis I know. I've reviewed our time together like data points, looking for patterns that would prove you were just fulfilling a contract. And do you know what I found? Every single moment that mattered had nothing to do with our arrangement. The way you laughed at my terrible movie choices. The morning you brought me coffee because you noticed I'd been working all night. The afternoon you sat with me in silence when I lost a major contract and didn't need words, just presence. The 1,000 small moments when you chose to be kind, to be present, to be real, when no one was watching and there was nothing to gain. You can't fake that. Even the best actress in the world couldn't sustain that level of genuine connection for 14 months. I accused you of not knowing if your feelings were real without the money. But the truth is, I was the one who didn't know. I didn't know if I was capable of the kind of love that exists outside of transactions and terms. I didn't trust myself to be enough without the fortune and the empire and all the things that usually make people stay. You proved me wrong. You walked away from the money. You walked away from 4 more months of financial security. You walked away because I wasn't trusting what we had, and in doing so, you showed me exactly how real it was. I'm not asking you to come back because of a contract. I'm asking you to come back because I love you. Because you're the variable I never knew I needed. Because my house feels empty without you in it. Because coffee tastes wrong when I'm drinking it alone. Because terrible movies aren't fun unless you're there to mock them with me. I'm asking you to come back and help me figure out this thing that can't be analyzed or predicted or controlled. This messy, terrifying, beautiful thing called love. If you're willing. Yours, Julian. I looked up from the letter, tears streaming down my face, to find Julian watching me with an expression that was completely unguarded. Vulnerable. Hopeful. You destroyed the contract, I said. It was always insufficient. It tried to contain something that couldn't be contained. He moved around the table, slowly, like he was afraid I might bolt. Vivian, I don't want 18 months. I don't want a business arrangement or a mutually beneficial transaction. I want a life with you. A real marriage. The kind that lasts because we both choose it every single day. Julian. He dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a new ring, different from the one I'd given back. This one was simpler, more personal. A sapphire is the exact color of the dress I'd worn the night we first kissed. Vivian Chen, will you marry me? Not because of a contract or a board of directors or financial necessity. But because I love you. Because you're my favorite pattern, the one I never want to solve completely. Because you're the best thing the algorithm never could have predicted. I laughed through my tears. That might be the nerdiest proposal in history. Is that a yes? Yes, you brilliant idiot. Yes, I'll marry you. Again. For real this time. He slid the ring onto my finger and stood, pulling me into his arms. His kiss was everything. Relief and joy and promise and home. When we finally pulled apart, Patricia was wiping her eyes in the corner. Well, that was disgustingly romantic. Julian laughed, actually laughed, his forehead resting against mine. I need to do this properly. Need to meet your mother again as your actual fiancé, not your contracted husband. Need to have a real wedding where the vows mean something. We can do all of that, I said, framing his face with my hands. But Julian, you need to understand something. That first wedding, the contracted one? It already meant something. At least to me. I meant every word I said that day, even if I didn't fully realize it yet. His eyes shimmered behind his glasses. I think I did too. I think I was already falling for you and just didn't have the emotional vocabulary to recognize it. We were both disasters from the start. The best kind of disasters. We got married again 6 months later, in a small ceremony by a lake in Oregon. My mother was there, healthy and glowing, tears streaming down her face. Julian's team from work attended, along with a handful of close friends who'd suspected something was different about us long before we figured it out ourselves. This time, I wore a dress I'd chosen myself. This time, Julian wrote his own vows instead of having a lawyer draft them. And this time, when he slid the ring onto my finger, there was no contract defining our terms. Just love and choice and a future we'd write together. I, Julian Castellanos, take you, Vivian Chen, to be my wife. My partner. The woman who proved that not everything worth having can be predicted or analyzed or controlled. You taught me that the best things in life exist outside of algorithms. That vulnerability isn't a weakness. That love is the most powerful variable in any equation. I promise to keep learning with you, growing with you, choosing you every single day for the rest of our lives. When it was my turn, I didn't need notes. I, Vivian Chen, take you, Julian Castellanos, to be my husband. the man who saved my mother's life and accidentally stole my heart. You're brilliant and impossible and sometimes too logical for your own good. But you're also kind and passionate and capable of more love than you give yourself credit for. You're my favorite pattern, the one I never want to completely solve. I promise to mock your terrible taste in movies, to remind you to feel and not just think, and to love you through every algorithm and equation and perfectly controlled moment of our lives. The kiss we shared as husband and wife, real husband and wife, tasted like freedom and forever. Years later, people still asked how we met. We'd smile at each other, that secret smile of people who shared something precious, and Julian would say we met at a conference and fell in love over data. It wasn't exactly a lie. We had met through data. Through a carefully constructed contract that tried to quantify and control something that couldn't be contained. We'd started as a transaction and ended as a love story. Proof that sometimes the algorithm gets it wrong. That sometimes the best outcomes are the ones you never see coming. Julian still ran at 5:30 every morning. Still drank too much coffee. Still watched terrible movies, though now I watched them with him, curled into his side while he whispered commentary that made me laugh. We worked together sometimes, his coding and my analysis complementing each other perfectly. We fought sometimes too, still learning from each other, still growing. But we always came back together. Because the contract might have brought us together, but love made us stay. My mother lived to see her grandchildren. Julian taught them to code while I taught them to see patterns in everything. We built a life that looked nothing like the one outlined in that original document. It was messier and more complicated and infinitely more beautiful. Sometimes, late at night, Julian would pull me close and whisper, "Best contract I ever signed." And I'd whisper back, "Best one I ever broke." Because in the end, that's what we did. We broke every term, rewrote every clause, and created something that existed completely outside the boundaries of what we'd originally agreed to. The contract said 18 months. But we were writing a different story now. One measured not in months or money or carefully defined terms, but in coffee-scented mornings and terrible movies and the thousand small moments when we chose each other over everything else. One that would last as long as we both kept choosing it. Which, knowing us, would be forever. So that's my story. A contract that was supposed to last 18 months turned into a lifetime. A fake marriage that became the realest thing either of us had ever experienced. Julian Castellanos, the man who thought love was just an algorithm, met his match in me. A woman who signed a contract thinking she was buying her mother's life but ended up finding her own. We went from strangers playing roles to partners who couldn't imagine life apart. We proved that sometimes the best relationships are the ones that start with the worst foundations. That love can grow in the most transactional soil. But here's what I want to know from you. Do you think Julian was right to question whether our feelings were real? When money is involved from the beginning, can you ever fully separate authentic emotion from financial incentive? Or does it not matter how something starts, only how it develops? Think about that moment when Julian accused me of maybe just being good at my job. It was cruel, but was there truth in it? How do any of us know our feelings are genuine? We all have reasons for being in relationships. Security, companionship, shared goals. Does having a financial component really make it less valid than any other practical consideration? And what about me leaving? Was that brave or stupid? I walked away from $1 million to prove a point. But what if Julian hadn't come after me? What if I'd sacrificed financial security for a grand gesture that ended up meaning nothing? Here's another angle. Julian destroyed our original contract and proposed for real. But isn't marriage itself just another contract? We traded one set of terms for another. The only difference was the presence of love. But love itself is unpredictable. It can end. It can change. At least the business arrangement had clearly defined boundaries. I'm genuinely curious about your perspective on this. In our modern world where everything from dating to marriage involves some level of transaction, apps and algorithms deciding who we meet, financial considerations influencing who we commit to, are we all just operating under different versions of contracts? Maybe Julian and I were just more honest about it from the start. And what about the timing? We fell in love somewhere around month 3 or 4, but we didn't admit it until much later. How many of those months were we performing for each other, convincing ourselves it wasn't real because it couldn't be? How much time did we waste being afraid? Or was that time necessary? Maybe we needed those months of denial to build something strong enough to survive the truth. Think about the moment I walked away. Julian saw it as proof of love. But I could have been cutting off my nose to spite my face. What if pride had cost me everything? Sometimes the grand gesture isn't the right move. Sometimes staying and fighting is harder than leaving. But I want to know what you would have done. If you were in my position, accused of faking feelings you knew were real, would you have stayed to prove it? Or left to make a point? There's no right answer. Just choices and consequences. And Julian. He spent 4 days analyzing our relationship like it was a data set. Some people would call that overthinking. Others might call it being thorough. He needed proof, evidence, patterns that confirmed what his heart was already telling him. Is that romantic or just sad? I think about our story a lot. How close we came to throwing it all away because we were both too scared to believe something good could come from such a transactional beginning. How many people miss out on love because the origin story doesn't fit their romantic ideals? We got lucky. We got our happy ending. But it required both of us to be brave in different ways. Julian had to admit he was wrong. I had to risk everything on faith. We both had to trust that something that started fake could become real. Not everyone gets that chance. Not everyone takes it when they do. So here's my final question. Was our love story beautiful because of the contract or in spite of it? Did the unusual beginning make what we built more precious, or did it just create unnecessary obstacles to something that would have happened anyway if we'd met under normal circumstances? I don't know. I'm not sure I'll ever know. What I do know is this: Julian stopped trying to predict outcomes and started experiencing moments. I stopped protecting my heart and started risking it. Together, we created something that couldn't be measured or controlled or defined by any contract. We proved that love is the ultimate variable. The one that breaks all the algorithms. The pattern that makes no sense until suddenly it's the only thing that does. The contract said 18 months. But we're living forever. And every single day, we choose it again. Now it's your turn. Tell me in the comments, have you ever made a choice that looked wrong on paper but felt right in your heart? Have you ever had to prove your feelings by walking away? Do you believe in love that starts from the most unlikely places? And if you connected with our story, if it made you think about contracts and choice and the courage it takes to believe in something without guarantees, share it. Because stories like ours remind us that the best things in life are the ones we can't predict. Julian and I got our happy ending. The question is, are you brave enough to write yours?